the dynamic as an actor is we're kind of in a place where our job is to please. Right. So it's a fine line of pleasing to deliver versus pleasing in a way that compromises your integrity. And that's the difference. I think we're so conditioned, like, I'm not difficult. I'm not difficult. I'm a team player. And it's really important to kind of also recognize the power of no. Thank you so much.
How does that feel from your fellow actors?
Incredible.
Yes.
And I think I need to just take a moment and take that in. I think too often in life we don't pause to receive, and it is really I'm incredibly humbled. I really am. So thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for saying that. We feel your humility. We feel it. So this year has been a juggernaut for you. The Substance, we'll talk about that later, but my God, The Substance. If you haven't seen it, oh boy, do you have homework. Capote and the Swans, absolutely gorgeous performance in Capote and the Swans. Landman on Paramount Plus, which just premiered this weekend. And the Bratz documentary, which we will talk about later. Andrew had a lot to unpack in that documentary. I think Andrew still has some work to do. So I guess just based on what you just said, how does all of this feel outside of this, today and this reception, but this kind of the year of Demi? I feel like we are seeing like a wide scope of performance and work from you in a condensed period, but we've known you can do this all along. So how does it feel to share this with us this year?
I'm just really sitting in such a place of gratitude and awe and joy. I think, we work in an industry that's feast or famine. And, and it's experiencing, as we all do, the kind of the lulls or the lows, or that which doesn't feel as uplifting or energizing or creatively inspiring. And, one thing I've learned is that something unto itself has no meaning. It only has meaning with that which you give it. And so I look at it with eyes that are in appreciation of both sides. So the lows also allow me to really experience the fullness of the joy of this creative opportunity to really be delving into my art, to be an artist, which is something I love. I love doing. So that's where I'm at with that.
It's a good place to be. So we will talk about The Substance and a number of other titles in a moment. But I wanted to talk about you as a
substance just sticking to you.
Yes,
we'll get back to it.
It's just waiting. It's like a blob, that bloody blob waiting for us at the end. So much blood and gore. I love it so much. So you have always been so open about your life. Your beautiful memoir, Inside Out, 2019, we really saw a gorgeous book, if you haven't read it. And you've been very frank about your somewhat chaotic childhood and young adult life. And we don't need to go into that because you can read the book. But what I did want to ask is, what provided respite to you during those times, creative respite, where you sort of tune out the chaos of maybe your home life and what was going on, the things that you couldn't control, but were there artistic openings in your life where you found joy, whether it was dance and singing? You have a wonderful voice. I've heard you sing in movies before.
I sing along.
You have a pretty
There's
good
a
voice.
difference.
But was there a teacher who sort of, kind of showed you, oh, there's a life beyond this. There's art. I see something in you. Where did you find that artistic space for yourself amidst kind of these challenges as a young person?
It's interesting because I don't think that's a very interesting and beautiful question that I've never really processed or thought about in relation to myself. My childhood was very unusual, and we moved so much in the most bizarre way, because I was in never less than 2 schools a year. So we were always moving. And I feel like part of my artistic expression was my ability to assess, my hypervigilance, to figure out who was who and where could I fit in, because that became a game, a creative game of reinventing myself to fit in, to find my place, to know not to be too attached, because we'd be packing up that U-Haul pretty quickly. But I think it was in an interesting way. I didn't have kind of what many other actors have, which is, I did theater and
school play.
I didn't really have that.
So sort of assimilation became your gift.
Yes.
That's really interesting. Not unlike what it feels like to step on a set and then have that set go away 3 months later, and then you're on to the next.
Yeah, where you
project.
step into a totally, unfamiliar environment with all new people. You don't know exactly where everything is, where you fit. And you have, it was an incredible skill set that came from that. I mean, the downside of it was that I don't think it helped me to know who I was.
Interesting. And you became a model as a teenager. How did that create an entree for you to look into performing? Like, at what point did acting become a reality as something that you wanted to try?
Well, what's interesting is that I think I wanted to be an actor. And because I made that decision when I was like 15, almost 16, and then I found very quickly that I was inexperienced and at an age where they would rather cast somebody over 18 to play a teenager. And so I modeled to pay the rent until I turned 18 and could really start to really pursue jobs. Because I learned quick, lie about your age for modeling, and nobody checked.
Nobody checked back then, yes. And at what point did you move to LA and devote yourself to the actor's life?
Well, I don't know. I mean, it is in my book, but my parents divorced, and I lived with my mother in a West Hollywood apartment building, and I met a young actress who was just a few years older than I was, a German actress, and who was the most kind of incredible, embodied young woman I had ever encountered, considering I felt very awkward. And we became friends. She lived there also with her single mother, and she spoke English quite well, but wasn't confident in reading, and would ask me to read scripts aloud to her. And this was Nastasia Kinski. And
I was waiting to see if it was somebody we'd know.
Yes. And so Roman Polanski had brought her over. She was studying and taking dance classes. And so it was my first kind of foray into the world, the possibility, combined with meeting someone. And I don't know if it was that she was European, so her sense of self was so much more comfortable than I could have ever imagined. And all I knew is I wanted what she had, even though I didn't know what it was. And the joy of kind of falling into reading these stories aloud in this format really just kind of captivated me. And so she then ended up going back to Europe to make Tess. And I just said one day, I want to be an actor. What do you got to do? How does it work? You get headshots. You get an agent. How do you do that? Like, that was literally the path.
Wow. That's so cool. So your first film, Choices.
Yes.
Have you seen this movie recently?
No, I generally don't watch myself.
So this little gem is on YouTube. Should you
no.
should you have the bandwidth? It's so grainy that it looks like it was shot on a print of a print of a print, those like YouTube. But it's a very sweet teenage love story. It was shot in Simi Valley, and this was 1981. What do you remember about that production, and how did you feel actually getting a role? That must have been kind of scary as your first project.
I mean, and I've said this before, I really came from the university of fake it till you make it. And, I moved out on my own just a few days after my 16th birthday. And so getting this job, if I really just take a moment and think back, what was that? I think I was terrified and doing everything possible to show that I could do whatever was asked. that I could figure it out.
So you sort of probably enjoyed being directed. You sort of having somebody guide you. You didn't show up sort of like leading with your ego. You were really open to the experience.
100%.
And what do you remember about your co-star, who I think he was a young man who was deaf, and you fall in love in the movie?
Yeah, I mean, you're remembering more than I am. I haven't spent a lot of time on this one. I remember having to learn to play not the violin, maybe the violin or the viola.
Oh, the viola. Okay. Another skill set.
Yes.
Again, if you have the chance, just look up Choices Demi Moore on YouTube.
Don't. There's a few that it's okay to just let go.
That too.
I wasn't even 18 yet on that one.
You seemed very young and very believable as a teenager because you were a teenager. So I think a lot of us saw you for the first time in General Hospital. I do remember those years, 1982, and you played a character named Jackie. And I did not remember this until I revisited that you were a journalist.
Yes.
You were a magazine journalist who came to town to interview Laura of Luke and Laura fame. And this first clip is also on YouTube, should you have interest. And I love soap operas because the stories that so many actors have about their time spent on them are so funny. I've talked to Matt Bomer, Bryan Cranston, Julianne Moore. They all have these incredible stories. And the through line is they all say it was incredible training. So tell me what you learned about learning lines, the rigor. I mean, that's a lot of work that you're pumping out each day. So tell me what you learned about the ethic piece of it.
I think, the preparation, I mean, when you had your daily scripts, not like weekly, but a daily script where it could easily be 20 pages. I think one of the greatest gifts of that, outside of like just being able to, kind of master learning lines, was also how important it was to be present. Because in many cases, you couldn't learn all of those lines, and which is why they have teleprompters there. So that you could learn to kind of hold like what it is that you're saying and be able to then stay present with the other actors.
And did you have acting training during this time? Were you seeing like teachers on the side, or did you have classes you would go to sort of hone your skills?
I kind of stepped into one class, but this is so illogical. But because there was a part of me in my own justification that felt like if I was in an acting class and they told me I was bad, that it would mean I couldn't do it. But that if I went and auditioned for a job, there could be a lot of reasons why I didn't get it. Maybe they wanted a different type. Maybe it was this. And so it was my own kind of way of buffering, I think, myself from potential rejection. And as I was trying to figure out really what it was to be an actor, like what.
Also how to take criticism too, because it's okay to hear maybe you're not doing that properly, and then you learn how to do it better the next day.
Which, to be on a set, to take direction, all of that was a joy, right? It was the idea that if you're studying something and they say you're bad, and I'm sure because I moved so much, the idea is if you don't get it all figured out right now, it's over. And so there was a lot of my drive that was very life or death, very survival.
Which totally makes sense based on what you just shared.
Well, and if you have nothing to lose.
That's right.
I didn't have anything, so.
Well, jumping ahead a few years, you definitely had a lot to lose, and you definitely won a lot from 85 to 86. I mean, it's sort of like, this is such a part of our lives. It's almost like so ubiquitous, it's hard to talk about. St. Elmo's Fire, About Last Night, One Crazy Summer, Wisdom. I mean, just an incredible run of films. And again, coming back to the Bratz documentary, revisiting that time, but now seeing it through all of your wise eyes now, it was very interesting to hear what Andrew had to say and the impact on him. You definitely come across as, I'll say, the most well-adjusted person in the film. And it's nothing against Emilio or Ali, but I could see Andrew sitting, he's like, wow, you're right. It was almost like a therapy session for him. And it was magical to see that connection. So
I mean, he did jokingly say that when they were editing the Bratz doc, that they always referred to me as the Obi-Wan Kenobi of the. But for me,
it was touching though to see that.
I was so moved by the exploration, and also that idea that what somebody does or doesn't do is irrelevant, but how we hold it is everything. And that to me so illustrated it, because while none of us liked the moniker, because we
You had
wanted
said
to be
you thought it was a
taken
little
serious.
unfair, right?
Yeah, but we also, you're 22, 23, you're trying to do something, you want to be taken seriously, you want to be seen as an adult and a professional. And so none of us liked the idea of being associated with being a brat. How ironic that this summer it's all about the brat summer.
It's back in style.
Yeah, it's we've come a long way. But how something can deeply affect our experience in life, and that's what was so which is why when he talked to me about doing it, there was no way I wanted to kind of miss on really knowing how it deeply affected him and his choices. Clearly, Emilio too, and I didn't know about the project that was something that they loved.
As a journalist, I can tell you it definitely made me question how I write headlines in the future. This whole thing was born out of a New York Magazine headline. And the writer, and I know what that writer felt. He's driving along like, that's a great play on words. That's the headline. Not thinking 40 years later, these people are still like processing.
Or even the impact of what it would have in that moment. It was like just clever. It was not. It was him also writing to get his next job.
Absolutely,
it wasn't personal.
No,
and
absolutely.
I got that about it. But things cannot be personal and still not feel good.
That is what they can both be true, as we know. So one of my favorite books I've read in the last couple of years, outside of your memoir, is Ed Zwick's memoir, which is incredible.
I have not read.
Oh, it's wonderful, absolutely wonderful. Edward Zwick, of course, the writer, director, producer. And he directed You in About Last Night, his first feature. And I was rereading the section where he was talking about the making of the film and you and Rob and your wonderful chemistry.
What did he say? Because I haven't read
it. He said you're a consummate pro and you and Rob were just wonderful to work with. And he said about you, quote, Demi was so emotionally available on set. Which I'm thinking, for one of your first films, this was still early on, for him to say that about you, that's quite a compliment. Did you feel yourself giving that on set in those movies at that time? Did you find, opening up is easy for me?
I mean, I don't, like, if you had asked me, I don't know if I would have thought of myself as that.
That's kind of what I'm wondering. Like, at the time, how did you see yourself?
I think I just wanted to do a great job. I just wanted to deliver. I wanted to be believable and deliver a truthful performance. And because truly, I was just still trying to figure out how it worked. How does this work? How do you build a character? How do you, tie the scenes together? How do you do this where you shoot out of continuity? Like it was like still where I could also feel that the stakes were really high. I mean, I was working with really wonderful and much more seasoned actors. I mean, Elizabeth Perkins
had come from Steppenwolf.
Yeah, Jim Belushi and Rob had been working for so many years as a I think he would be considered a child actor.
Like Outsiders, he was getting maybe a teenager. So you were kind of the newbie in that space, kind of use your point, faking it till you made it.
Yep.
Learning on the job, which I mean, this is like every job, but that's still a lot.
But I'm really,
I'm
really moved at that reflection.
He's a wise man.
He's sharing that
incredible talent. Love that dude. So jumping ahead, I mean, there's just so many movies. My God, we could be here for 10 hours. We're just going to go straight to 1990 to Ghost because we have to. And I like to give credit to all the filmmakers whenever possible. Bruce Joel Rubin wrote the script, of course. Jerry Zucker, and quite a departure. This is a guy who had made Airplane. This is not a movie that people thought was going to work. And a lot of people didn't think this movie was going to work. And I did read, and you'll have to tell me if this is true, that Bruce Willis passed on the lead. Is that true?
That I don't think is true.
Okay, this is why I'm fact-checking.
Maybe I don't think that's true.
Okay, but I know a lot of people
at least
passed.
You didn't share it with me. No, I don't think it's true.
Okay, this is why I fact-checked. But apparently Michael J. Fox, a number of hot actors at the time, just thought, this on paper, this is a pretty wild concept.
In truth, I read this and I was like, and in a similar way to The Substance, where I thought, this could be amazing. And it could also be a disaster. Right. Because, I mean, for Ghost, we're talking about combining a comedy, a thriller, and a romance. Right.
And like a revenge story, and there's like the criminal element too.
And you know, with a director, as you mentioned, who'd done Airplane. And you're like, wow, this is a leap. But it was delving into something for me that, you know, we're much more open now talking about, you know, past lives, aspects of supernatural, things that are the intangible. You know, in 1990, that just wasn't, you know.
It's like Shirley MacLaine in her book. That was,
yeah.
There weren't a lot of people talking about this.
We were, we shot this in 89. It came out in 90, but we were shooting in 89. And it was such a beautiful, sensitive way of touching into this world in a you know what it was is it was going down that path of that was dealing with loss but bringing hope.
It was gorgeous. And then Whoopi as a comedy relief was just her Oscar-winning role. She was fantastic,
deserved,
so deserved. So I've always wanted to know about your haircut in this movie because it's my favorite haircut of all time, really. But so much styling that goes into these films is so much about the expectation of what a woman should look like on screen. And to have that severe of a cut, I always thought was such a daring move. So I was wondering, whose idea was it? Whose vision of what Molly should look like did we end up seeing on screen?
Well, it wasn't Jerry's because we met. The first time we met, my hair was, you know, almost to my waist. And, you know, I had just had a baby and I was feeling like I needed to cut my hair. I don't know.
Make life easier for you.
Just one of those things. So we meet a second time and I've cut my hair to my shoulder. I go on holiday for the first time in Paris and I had been carrying around in my wallet for years this picture of Isabella Rossellini with a short haircut. And I just had one of those moments where I walked into a salon on the corner speaking no French and said, hey, I want this. And so I'm away in Paris. The agents make the deal and I show up and I thought Jerry was going to kill me. Seriously kill me.
And then he's like, get the wig maker here as soon as possible.
I mean, I think that I didn't see all the behind the scenes, but I'm sure that there was quite a meltdown of, and it wasn't what I think he had in his mind. But in the end, I think it very much worked for who Molly was, being an artist, the whole thing.
And all the
but
clay, she didn't have any hair to get clay on.
Yes. See, this would be a mess.
So Ghost, we love Ghost, but I think we forget like what a giant hit it was. It grossed $505 million globally on a budget of 22. That's an almost unheard of hit these days.
How much did we?
505 million on a budget of 22 million, which is extraordinary. Did that movie suddenly cause a major shift in not only more offers coming in or the way people were perceiving you, and you had this new look, you kind of had this new vibe? Was it kind of like post Brat Pack? You were sort of being launched into the next phase. Is that how that felt?
I think it did. I think it was definitely moved things to where I felt it was just like a moment of expansion. You know, it's not like everything changed overnight, but it just shifted in a way that just presented more opportunities.
Well, and also you were bankable as the same. I mean, you could open a movie, right?
I mean, ironically, I remember seeing it the first time, and really, it was also an experience as an actor where I felt I had a much greater opportunity to be part of the process. You know, seeing some dailies, really kind of, you know, I felt more part of the collaboration, and. I remember seeing the first, cut of it and thinking, wow, this I think is really good. And then when the reviews came out, which were awful.
Yeah, they were not great.
They were awful. And I was so stunned. I didn't know, do I have an ability to like trust myself? Because I thought I saw something that really worked. So I stopped reading reviews after that.
I was just going to ask, did that start a trend of not reading reviews? They can be helpful, but they're also not helpful sometimes. Yeah.
Well, what I realized is that while it always feels better when they're nice,
Of course. That's the preference.
or when they're good, but going back to this idea of what we make something mean, that if you give a lot of power and too much value to the good, you have to give an equal measure to the bad. And so finding a way to be neutral where you can appreciate the good, but appreciate the bad or that which doesn't work as just all information. It's just information in service to moving me to where I need to go.
I love it. So much wisdom. I love it. So the first story I read on my phone this morning as I was doom scrolling in bed was a New York Times piece. And the headline was, "Millennial Pregnancy Gets Its Demi Moore Moment." And I thought, ooh, what is this about? So it was all about the Vanity Fair cover, which you appeared as a gorgeous pregnant woman of 7 or 8 months pregnant?
7.5 months.
1991.
Yeah.
And I remember this at the time. It felt like a giant scandal. And today, by today's measures, it's like nothing, of course. But it's really interesting to think that moment really shifted not only for you, but also this idea of not hiding. And women in Hollywood were sort of like, not only are we talented, but we're also creating children, and we are still bankable and still hire us. So when you look back on this, not only was it a PR moment, a brilliantly executed PR moment, how do you feel about making that move? And were you scared about the blowback?
So, I mean, you have to kind of look at the evolution, like I wasn't looking at it from the outside in. So first of all, the photo that is on the cover was taken at the end of the photo shoot for me, for our family.
Oh, wow.
And Annie had photographed me in my first pregnancy,
Right.
again, for our family. And so I was doing the cover and I just happened to be that pregnant. And so when I was speaking to her, I was saying I had such challenges with my self-confidence with my body. And I was saying how I felt much more confident and beautiful and even sexy, and that I would love our photos to reflect that. So as we were doing the end, I obviously have the big jewelry on and nothing else. But I said, boy, wouldn't it be amazing if they had the courage to do this for the cover? And then walked away. 2 weeks later, Annie calls me and said, how would I feel about them doing this? And so to your point, I had an awareness of some of the perceptions around pregnancy, about a woman's body. But I didn't think about it as making any big statement, or it was really more about my own questioning. Why is this a taboo? Why is this
sort of
something
testing your own, I guess, pathway in terms of how you thought about it?
Just it was my own questioning and challenge to why certain things are the way they are. And I also looked at it as, this idea that women were celebrated when they announce that they're pregnant, and they're celebrated when the baby comes, but please don't remind us you ever had sex. Like that was something that was a shameful thing, that you needed to keep it covered and wear Peter Pan collars.
Of course. Well,
like really, nobody's done anything. Immaculate conception somehow.
Of course. And well, like Lucy on I Love Lucy, she couldn't stay pregnant. But this piece today referenced this idea of women holding their bellies now. And the writer put it so beautifully, Amanda Hess. She said, this has emerged a way of signaling to the public, don't worry, there's still a skinny person under here. Because God forbid someone would look at you and think, oh, she has a protrusion. So this became this thing, this signal to us, oh, don't worry, I'm still skinny underneath. And it's really beautiful the way she talked about it, and just the evolution. And really without that image, I don't know, at least in social media, the acceptance of this, and like Rihanna, my God, the beauty that she's enjoyed, like dressing up her bump, as we call it.
I mean, it brings me joy. It's amazing every time. I encourage, every woman, if it's in their comfort zone, to capture this moment, because even if you have another child, it will never be exactly the same. And I always did it for that child.
So after that milestone moment came a very impactful trio of films, which for me all subvert expectations of female characters in super interesting ways. A Few Good Men in 1992, amazing. Which I rewatched this morning. My God, it's still so good. Indecent Proposal in 1993. And Disclosure in 1994. So A Few Good Men, written by Aaron Sorkin, his first feature, directed by Rob Reiner. Also a hit, 141 million globally on a budget of 40 million. So another box office hit. So one thing I always loved about this movie, not only the story, the acting, incredible artwork, is that your character and Tom's character do not hook up romantically. And I remember even as a young person thinking, when are they going to have sex? Is this the scene, like you come to his house in the rain, it's like, oh, this is the night they have sex. And then you never do. And I remember thinking, that is the coolest fucking thing I have ever seen in my adult life, that you have these giant stars doing their thing and Jack Nicholson just ripping it up in the courtroom, and that's the story. And Joanne was just a professional woman. How did it feel to you to be able to play that role without this like subtext of romance and just being a professional female going toe to toe with her male peers?
Well, first of all, I am so grateful to Rob Reiner and Aaron Sorkin for taking a stand to the studio.
The studio they wanted scenes. Aaron
Sorkin, was quoted as saying that, when they were being pressured to write a love scene for Tom and I, or, some romantic aspect, that the studio executive's comment was, then why do we have Demi Moore? And I think it's reflective of the time.
And you were a giant star.
But it's also just kind of reflective of just the time of, a limited perspective on a woman's role. And our role in relationships with the opposite sex. We do have an ability to have friendships.
Oh my God, yes.
And
not sleep with colleagues.
That it's not all. It was very empowering for me to do something that was not a romance, not a sexualized in any way.
Thank you to Rob and Aaron for standing their ground. That is really extraordinary now in retrospect.
Well, and they maintained the integrity to the material.
Right.
That's what's most important.
Right.
The thing for me is, if it had been it would have made a difference in telling that story, then I would have been all for it. It didn't.
Right.
It didn't serve.
It would have been totally gratuitous.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. And on to Indecent Proposal. 266 million on a budget of 38. Another huge hit. I know, I'm telling you, this is like the box office queen. Amazing. So Adrian Lyne, of course, who had made Fatal Attraction. Sherry Lansing at Paramount. Bless Sherry, she's amazing. She was really a huge inspiration behind getting this made. But I was also struck by, I did not realize, not only was this based on a novel, but a woman wrote the script, which is huge. And for you to have a female POV as a screenwriter, I have a feeling for this movie was very impactful. But then I did some more reading that they wanted to change the ending on an Indecent Proposal. And Amy wanted you to be rejecting both Robert Redford's character and Woody. But the studio was like, no, we need to have her go back to David at the end, which is really interesting.
You mean Sherry?
Yes. No, and Amy Holden-Jones actually.
Yes.
She had kind of wanted to be like, Diana needs to just leave these people. But it's interesting. So it's so like you make progress on A Few Good Men, and then the next film, it's like, well, this is already a little much. So tell me not only what attracted you to this story, which was, again, kind of controversial, and how did you feel about sort of the way it was sewn up at the end?
One, I did not know, or unless I've just forgotten.
Made a lot of movies over the years.
About there being an alternate. But I have to say, in this context, I'm grateful that it led back to the relationship, because to me, the crux of this was about sacrifices one makes for partnership. And to have lost the partnership feels like it would have left you very empty.
Agreed.
and
they really did love
totally
each other.
Dissatisfied, which who wants to go and be dissatisfied? But I think because it would have been a truth for her to leave both, but I think there would have been things that needed to be different throughout the rest of the story to have affected that.
Yeah, and we believe they loved each other. That it felt real to us, which is why the infidelity or whatever word you want to apply to it felt so sad. And I think they made the right choice. What do you remember about the way this movie was received? Because it was very well received and it did well. But was there kind of a sense of, ooh, Denise, she's willing to go there? Like I mean, did it kind of change your risk factor a little bit?
I mean, I think I knew that it was very thought-provoking material, that this was going to really challenge people to reevaluate just their and explore that question. Is there a price for everything? Like that to me was really an interesting question. And also, just the dilemma of a young couple trying to survive and what that would entail. It definitely felt controversial. Like it made a lot of people uncomfortable. I think we're still quite a puritanical country. And I think we have a lot of fear around sexuality. And, fear of talking about it, fear of questioning. And so I think this definitely stirred the pot.
Not a lot has changed.
I think that I do have quite a few that kind of touch on that, being
sure.
a bit of a pot stirrer.
Well, I would say Disclosure is in that category as well. Written by Michael Crichton, of course. May he rest in peace. Brilliant man. Box office $214 million on a budget of 55. Another hit. This one wasn't as well received by critics, and I read some of the reviews, and it was interesting. I love this movie. I think it's brilliant. But some of them were like, oh, this doesn't seem plausible. That was the word that kept coming up in a lot of reviews, and I was thinking, why? Why doesn't this seem plausible? Do you remember feeling at the time that people didn't necessarily get the story you were trying to tell? Because I certainly got it. I don't see what is implausible about this.
I think again, it's very interesting. It was challenging people's general collective consciousness around the idea of what a woman is capable of. And in this case, it was trying to deny a woman who had a more aggressive sexual appetite. But in a way, no different than the denial of sexual abuse happening to young men.
Right, very much.
It's just part of...
Abuse only happens one way, and it's a man dominating a woman in some capacity. Right. I think things have finally changed, thankfully, the last few years. We're finally talking about this.
Definitely.
Very, very gutsy movie. And Michael Douglas. What a co-star.
And Barry Levinson.
Barry Levinson. Yeah, beautifly made.
What's so interesting is that film originally was supposed to be Annette Bening, who I think would have been amazing, and who I'm a big fan of. But she ended up pregnant, and I had just had a baby. So I started that movie when my youngest daughter was a month old.
Oh, my God.
I started A Few Good Men when my daughter at that point was 2 months old.
And you auditioned for A Few Good Men while you were pregnant.
I auditioned for A Few Good Men. I think it was right within a couple of days of shooting the Vanity Fair cover.
Wow.
Tom always said it was a little embarrassing for him having to read those scenes as Joe Galloway with a huge belly.
You somehow got over it, though. I love it. So
we do what we've got to do.
You do,
right?
and also we have to normalize pregnant women just being in professional set. I mean, we still don't even see pregnant women on TV that often. We don't. This is still such a strange relationship we have with this stuff. So, thank you for all you've done on that front.
Thank you.
Yes. So one of my favorite performances of yours is one of the most harrowing, in my opinion. If These Walls Could Talk. In 1996, speaking of pregnancy and speaking of a lot of these issues. If you haven't seen this HBO original film, please watch it and rewatch it. It's absolutely stunning. Written and directed by Nancy Savoyka, who had made Dogfight, which is a beautiful movie with River Phoenix. In the movie, if you haven't seen it, it's 3 portraits of women dealing with unplanned pregnancies in the same house in different eras. And Demi's character was a nurse in the 50s. The scene, we won't say what happens, but she resorts to drastic measures to end her pregnancy. How did that feel to shoot that scene in the kitchen? And how did it feel to know that you had women behind the scenes nurturing this project? Because this is really tough stuff.
I mean, first of all, it took a lot to get somebody to have the courage to make it. And it was really, like I can look back now to that being HBO's, one of their kind of turning points to opening up to doing stories that...
But just taking risks that a studio would never have made this movie and released this movie in theaters.
No, I mean, it was a sensitive subject then. Obviously, it's an even more sensitive subject now, but it felt from where I was sitting very important for us, and also such a powerful way to explore the issue of an unwanted pregnancy by looking at what was happening in the 50s, what was happening in the 70s, and what was happening at that time, present day, 90s, and except for the 70s portrayal, the 50s and present day in both cases held violence and a lack of protection. But I just have to say, like, HBO was incredible that they really gave us the room to make this story, to go to those places that were really daring and not easy to watch, particularly my episode, because it was what women were left with, what we potentially could be left with again in many states in our country.
Very timely, unfortunately. Yes. So, on to 2 very different films, Striptease and G.I. Jane. 1996 and 97. So both of these movies talk about juggernaut talking points in the zeitgeist for very different reasons. Striptease, you broke the records for female actor salary, $12.5 million you earned in Striptease. Huge milestone. It's so interesting. These kind of working for a trade, we report on salary all the time now. It's sort of like, oh, so-and-so's debating this and working out a contract. This stuff wasn't as much public knowledge back then. So when this got out that you had been paid this amount of money, how did that feel? And how do you remember, I guess, being received in the business? Were people like, yay, finally? Or was there kind of like, who does this woman think she is? I mean, it's a very different culture.
I think it's always such a weird thing discussing
it's so weird.
money. It's so kind of crass.
It is, absolutely.
I think that the idea that it was kind of reflected as, a real shift in how women were being perceived, their value, their place in our industry was all overall generally very positive. I would say the blowback that kind of occurred later was a little bit more less overt and a little bit more like kind of covert undermining that was almost not really ready to in this outside perception, let me win. And for me, it was never about being paid equal to a man. It was just looking to be paid what I earn, what I should earn based on what you've listed that I had done.
More than made your mark at this point.
And so it was really never about being in competition or anything. It was just, and nor did I even think of it as it was occurring as being the highest paid. What I realized as it happened is, what a profound honor it was to be part of changing things for all women. That was powerful and moving for me.
Agree.
And I think I felt, obviously I did Striptease, I did G.I. Jane. And when I really knew that there was a negative impact is when I realized that they were going after G.I. Jane months and months and months before it was ever even out, ever even any press beginning and starting to tear it down. And, kind of my reflection of that, as I've shared in other interviews, is that in an interesting way, because I played a stripper and I got paid that money as a stripper, I was being shamed. And in a certain way, kind of in terms of again, this is like unspoken stuff. It's as if I betrayed
more
women.
Hurtful, though. It's more hurtful when it's unspoken.
But it's almost as if by doing striptease, I had betrayed women. And then in G.I. Jane, I had betrayed men and was being paid. And so it's like it's almost like you don't get to have too much. And so there was a tearing me down that occurred. Again, I don't take it personal. I think anybody whoever it had been, they would have been hit. Because we do have a little bit of a cycle. They want to discover you, to tear you down, to rediscover you.
Right. And the timeline is on their time. Like you're peaking too soon, or now you're too old, and it's sort of like these aren't the milestones we plotted for you, and you sort of had subverted that.
But I also, because I really hold the perception in life that everything is happening for me, not to me. And from that lens of perception, I think that there were a lot of other things happening in my life that, while this brought up certain doubts and uncertainties, and there were things happening right along the same time, my mother passing, my marriage ending, that it needed to be a time actually that I needed to step back and reevaluate. And while it didn't feel good, what I trust when I look at things through that lens is that when I can step back and say, this is happening for me, I don't have to like it. It doesn't have to feel good. I can be disappointed. I can be hurt, but I can trust that it's trying to give me something. And if I can just get out of the way and allow it to be revealed, and that may not be tomorrow. It may be years. But I do trust that it is in service to me. So even
Love
with that, and I think the hardest part with G.I. Jane is that it was, it was a film I was deeply proud of. And I was just, I think I felt disappointment that it, in a way, just didn't get enough of a chance to encourage people to see it, even though I think it actually did pretty well.
It did very well. And
I mean...
Our benchmark for doing well back then, I mean, it's just, these are giant moments. Absolutely. But it's interesting that Ridley Scott not only was your director on that one, but also Thelma and Louise, which was also torn apart at the audacity of this movie centered on women who acted like crazy people. And then, if you haven't seen it, you know how it ends. If you haven't seen it, you have a lot of catching up to do. But and you have spoken glowingly of working with Ridley on G.I. Jane. What do you remember talking about with him? He's a man who's no nonsense, all about the work, very inspiring. Did he allay any of these concerns?
As Paul Mescal told me last night, we were talking about Ridley, he was like, what I love is that he's not sentimental.
Yeah, exactly. That's the way he comes across.
Tell me the question again.
Just sort of, what do you remember him...
Oh, about the experience.
Sort of like, or just sort of casting like, tune out those people. Like, we're making a cool movie here.
So here's one of those like, oh my God, I can't believe it moments. So this project came to me, and also as an opportunity to produce. So it was one of the earlier forays into producing, and my magic wand wish list #1 choice was Ridley. And he was so big, I thought, we'll never get him. We'll never get him. So when he said yes, I mean, everything for me, it's like it was just an incredible moment. And working with him, I mean, he took the material and he deepened into the story. And because he's one of those directors that I feel has such a beautiful visual way of storytelling, but also really understands story
and entertainment. Like he
Definitely.
knows how to make, he tells entertaining stories that have a huge story that means something, which is really rare. He is this, wow. And he's 86, I think, still doing it.
And I got to work with Anne
Incredible.
Bancroft.
I was just about to
I
ask.
mean, for me,
That was my next question. Those scenes that you have in her office and that southern drawl that she's that woman was just a master. What was it like sharing the space with her?
well, I had to kind of get out of my total like dumbstruck awe so that I could then be, all right, shift gears. You got to be, you're in the scene. You're doing the scene with her. You can't like, I really, it was just, it was beautiful watching her, like her work, and to, I just felt like I got better. Like working with her, I just felt like you're making me a better actor. Just watching kind of the simplicity and the strength and the power, like her choices, the subtlety, it was magnificent.
She was so natural.
Yeah.
Incredible.
She told me one thing that always stayed with me. We had a lovely like dinner before, just the two of us. And, you know, she was talking about her husband and her son. And I obviously had all of my kids and just our family. And then she said, you know, I really love being offered the job. Sometimes I don't love as much doing it. But she said, I love getting those offers.
It's like being invited to a party. You don't really want to go, but you just like that you were invited.
Exactly.
Yeah. And of course, Anne was married to Mel Brooks, for those who don't know, the wonderful Mel Brooks. So I want to jump ahead a few years to some of your directing work. In 2008, you made a short called Streak with your daughter, Rumor Willis, I haven't seen it, but it sounds very funny. And then in 2001, you worked on Lifetime's 5, that really wonderful collection of films. And you seem like you have great director energy, and you seem like you'd be really good at directing. So tell me what you enjoyed about those experiences.
And this will lead into Substance as well. One of the things, you know, being behind the camera was just the freedom of it not being focused on how you look and how you sound, what you're doing, was also very liberating. And I think because I had experience being as an actor on the other side of newer directors or directors who perhaps weren't as confident, I was always a little bit nervous. Like I'd never wanted to direct if I didn't feel I could answer every question.
Because you know how it feels to be on the other end of someone who's not 100% sure.
But what was for me so that I enjoyed so much was really being able to be part of the bigger storytelling as opposed to just my part. Really being able to kind of, you know, use the camera, and I loved being in the editing room.
That's where the story is often cobbled together.
Yeah, I mean, but I also really I enjoyed the time engaging with the actors and finding it's just like a different way of working. But it's really, you know, kind of shifting from being part of the story to being the storyteller. Yeah, I loved it. But I would love to do. I mean, people do say that to me often, but it's a big commitment, and I'd have to really find the right.
Well, it's just so nice to have someone who's calm at the helm, right? I think calmness and that energy, I think it just permeates a set. And we've all been on sets where it's not the case. So
that is true.
I'm sure you've had your share. I wish we had more time to talk about Margin Call, another one of my favorite movies, 2011 Sundance hit. I rewatched that today too. Another great one. I know. I went deep, Demi. I went deep.
Wow.
But I want to jump to Capote and the Swans versus the Swans. Anne Woodward, if you haven't seen this, gorgeous. And Ryan Murphy, the king of Hollywood. It sounded like you said an immediate yes when he called you with this opportunity.
I did, because...
And what made you say that?
Because, so Ryan and I had this long history. Before he was the Ryan Murphy that everyone knows, He, you know, he had written a script for me. We had gone back and forth. He had this other script, but then it didn't go. And I had said no on one occasion, and then I had talked him out of me on another occasion. And I had really wanted to do something with him. I love the way, you know, he has written for women, the stories. It's just, and I just thought this time, he wanted to talk to me about this. I didn't know anything about it, and the message was, tell her to please just talk to me before she talks herself out of it. And so
he knows you well.
So as soon as we got on the phone, I was actually shooting the Substance when we spoke. He just said, it's, you know, this is basic. It's Truman. It's the Swans. And I just said, whatever it is, I'll do it. I literally didn't even know anything about Anne Woodward. But I did know somewhat about Truman Capote. And so I was just ready to jump in. I was ready to go.
And it's fun to not overthink sometimes, right?
It is. And also just, you know, sometimes the act of someone knowing you're going to trust them, that they're holding you as much as they're going to ask you to hold them with your performance.
It's beautiful if you haven't seen it. Really stunning.
Yeah, Tom Hollander.
Oh my God, Tom Hollander. And your co-stars, again, we
all
can
of
for all of them.
Please.
All of them.
Naomi, Diane, like Chloe. It's incredible.
It's absolutely stunning ensemble. And finally, we arrive at The Substance, 2024. And your character, Elizabeth Sparkle. And of course, we want to give a shout out to your writer-director, Coralie Farget. And I also want to reference Pierre-Olivier Parson. Is that the amazing makeup artist, prosthetics artist? Oh my God, he had quite a job. So outside of your collaborators, what drew you to wanting to do this story? And I know you've probably answered this question 1,000 times in the last few months, but pretend that you haven't answered it. This is the very first time you're asking, but outside of the team and the wonderful people you worked with, what about this story spoke to you on a gut level?
Well, first of all, it was such first of all, I'm reading the script, and we read many scripts, and we're not surprised. We know where it's going next. We can almost like lay it out ourselves, like da, 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 da. And I kept going, oh my God, wow, oh my God, okay, all right, comes out of the back, great, shared consciousness.
And there isn't a lot of dialogue in this script. So what was it like to read it? It's almost like a novel.
Well, it was a very long script because she really, wanted to put in all the detail of how because Coralie is a very visual and symbolic storyteller. But I think as I read it as a whole, I felt like that it was very compelling and so out of the box way of delving into this subject matter of aging, our particular industry, the kind of the higher standards of that come for a woman. But the thing that moved me, that really like hit me in my gut, was that violence that we can have against ourselves, the way in which we can dissect the harsh criticism and not just about our appearance, but whether we're smart, whether, we're any good, and just that kind of depths of compare and despair that I felt was so human, so relatable, and so needed as an exploration for us to take our own from it, for wherever we are at in our own journey of self-love and self-acceptance. And then just from an actor's point of view, I had gotten to a place not too long before this script came along that I really started to feel like I hadn't had anything come that was interesting, that really felt challenging and enriching, and started to feel like maybe this part of my life was complete. Not over, but just complete. Maybe I had done everything I was supposed to.
Is that a sad feeling for you?
I think it's a combination. It's kind of bittersweet because at the same time, if it's done, if it's complete, and that's why there's a difference for me in the language of not saying something's done, but something that's complete. And but what I realized is I didn't know the answer. I didn't have that answer, and if I didn't have the answer, then I needed to look at where I needed to open myself up and inject more energy and focus into getting that question answered. And ironically, 2 weeks later, this script came across my desk. And
amazing. It's amazing.
And it was definitely I don't want to say a low point, but yes, there was a combination of a little bit of grief of feeling, because this has been such a big part of my life. But if you're not doing work that is challenging you, and I read this and I said, this was really going to push me out of my comfort zone. This is emotionally, physically, and I knew if it was something where obviously Corley wanted me for it, that I was ready to jump in and explore this, especially knowing this wasn't about being shot in my most glamorous, that in fact it was going to be pretty much like, you need to look like shit on many of these days.
Was it a combination of excitement about that factor and fear? Was it kind of all wrapped up in the same feeling? Like, am I ready for this? Like stripping away my ego, stripping away vanity, and just like almost like a roller coaster, like, let's just go for it. Is that how it felt? Or were was it a process?
I think because I also, having in my much younger years, which is also, I talk about in my book, had dealt with a lot of my own self-sabotaging through kind of my harsh relationship with my own body. I felt like I really understood what this was. And so for me, it was, yes, I knew that this was almost in a certain way the next level of shedding those parts that were potentially still unhealed. But I also felt like I had a little bit more of an objective view, because I'm not Elizabeth. I have a life, a family. I haven't placed everything in my life into the validation of my career. But I understood it. I understood and know the moments of it. And so when I got there, it was less about dealing with my own ego on a daily basis and more about what do I need to do to support and help tell this story in the most authentic, honest, vulnerable, raw way possible.
Well, mission accomplished. Who has seen it? Everybody said, oh, look at all this. It's a wild ride. It's the movie for our times, I'd like to say. Really stunning work. Congratulations. And I hope the Academy broadens its scope of acting performances to include horror performances, because there have been so many great performances this year, yours among them. Fingers crossed.
Thank you.
So we have about 20 minutes left, so we'll just kind of do some general questions. You said something really interesting in the Bratz documentary that I wanted to revisit, which was, quote, "At the time, I didn't have a lot of value for myself. I was so fearful of failing and losing and desperate to fit in." And this is the part that I'm most interested in. "My need to please was on high alert." I'm wondering, when did that fade, or has it?
I mean, I think the dynamic as an actor is we're kind of in a place where our job is to please. Right. So it's a fine line of pleasing to deliver versus pleasing in a way that compromises your integrity. And that's the difference. I think we're so conditioned, like, I'm not difficult. I'm not difficult. I'm a team player. And also I was having a conversation with two friends who are also actors, and we were saying, that's that idea in a way we kind of look at, the director and the producer as kind of like the parents, right, and you're the children. And sometimes we have parents on us, at the helm who, create nurturing and safety, and sometimes we don't. And so it's really important to kind of also recognize the power of no. Because when you say no, you're also letting the universe that there's something else that you want brought your way, that this isn't it. And so the power of no is also saying, I value myself. And I think in that idea of getting caught up in pleasing too often, whether it's being rushed for time, waving your turnaround, which... Anybody relate to that? Again, sometimes we want to wave our turnaround because we're in the middle of something, and gosh, please let us just finish so we can start fresh tomorrow. But the power of no is, not a negative. The power of no is actually can be very, empowering.
Yes, it's a good word. We should use it more often. When have you felt the most terrified as a performer, and how did you get through those moments?
I think I'm usually the most terrified when I'm too caught up in an outcome, because it might be that it's a scene, it's usually it's around some kind of emotional delivery. It's never about the outcome of the project or how it's going to do in the box office. I don't ever focus on that at all. It's usually only within the work is when I'm the most terrified. But I also like to always think that there's a difference between being scared and being in fear. When you're in fear, which is, again, information, it's telling you this is dangerous. When you're scared, it usually means there's something that you're fearing about being seen, about being vulnerable. And that's usually when you need to lean in, not lean out.
So true. And what is the first thing you do when you get a script? What is your process for not only reading, making notes, and maybe after you get the job? How do you approach that? What's your sort of jumping off point to immersing yourself in the project?
I think when I'm taking in the script as a whole, I'm really kind of looking at what's this story? What is this about? What's the overall story? And, I'm thinking about who the director is, who the writer is, if there's anybody already cast. So sometimes when you're reading, you have a sense of kind of the feel of it. And then as I go back and look again, I'm kind of looking at character, and then I usually kind of know if I'm feeling that in me. Is there some like kind of call? Is there something in that? And usually if there is something that feels, I don't know, like just kind of gives you that buzz of excitement, of something that feels challenging. And then once like I get the job, then for me, it's really, and every character is different. Like playing a real person is very different than stepping into Elizabeth Sparkle, who, where it's a world that is somewhat surreal, but also based in, and my job being really to anchor it in reality. But I really, like in the case of The Substance, because there was so little dialogue and because I had all of my scenes were really often with the reflection of myself.
You're acting with yourself, essentially.
Or with I had no one that I was feeding off of except for whatever. And so I did a lot of very deep, diligent work, breaking down each moment, each scene, the life of this woman, so that I just, for myself, knew that I could feel that I was alive in every moment, that I had life, I had thought going on that was in and around this woman's life. And also knowing that Coralie was very, very focused on her shots, and in some cases started entire scenes this close, where you had no chance to get a spatial awareness. And so and having to kind of constantly find your center. And so doing that work, really finding like the beats for myself so that I could have it all in me and lived in me so that I could let it go and just be present.
That's amazing. And has the way you learned your lines changed over the years? Do you have a prescribed sort of method for learning, or does it depend on the project or the scope of the character?
It kind of depends on the project. Obviously, if you're doing something that, if you're playing a lawyer and that's language that is not,
like Aaron Sorkin language.
Yeah, where it's not like right at, your fingertips. So it's different. Yeah, each thing is kind of different. Sometimes there are certain ones that feel better to wait and do on the day because
soap opera.
But it's like being on the day so that actually you're not so in your head. I did a great exercise when I was preparing for Capote. I had an actor friend read Truman for me, and instead of knowing the lines, we were just fed the lines, didn't know them, and then had to say them. And then the next person's line was fed. So neither of us knew the scene. And there was something about having to be really listening that, wow, it was a game changer at experiencing something so present and alive with the other person. And also finding like, it took you out of your head of like, this is what I think the scene is, or this is how it's written. We were just seeing what came.
Almost like improv, dramatic improv.
It was, except you're being fed the line. And so as you're listening to the line and then trying to say it, and somebody like, what was the line? Like, but it also made it so, it just opened up a whole different pathway within.
I love that. And you have worked with some extraordinary people over the last few decades. Are there people who are on your bucket list in terms of collaborators, directors, writers, fellow actors, people you have never worked with who you hope to?
I mean, there are many people. And, where I'm sitting today is from a place that says, I thought maybe this was complete, to feeling like, wow, where I am right now is I just want to stay present and open to all possibilities. There are many that I do think we do manifest. I think we do, like, roles choose us as much as we choose them.
Well, I saw a photo of you and Nicole Kidman at the Governor's Awards last night, and I said, that needs to happen.
I would love that. Obviously, we've known each other a long, long
and
time.
And you have been sort of circling each other over the years, but I feel like that could be a two-hander,
That would be great.
And is there a moment in your career that you wish you would have better advocated for yourself? And despite all your success, and you earned wonderful money for a lot of your projects, was there a moment where you look back and you think, God, I really wish I would have handled that differently?
Yes.
I love those kind of answers.
Yes. I will say, and I won't say which film it was, but I would say the one time I was pushed to say yes to a project because it would get my quote up ended up being a disaster experience, a disaster in so many respects. And it's never how I've looked at things. I've never been motivated to, that has never been what's been my drive. And I think the universe made it really clear to me that that is not the right path. I mean, and it was one of those where it didn't feel comfortable, like in my body, but I was kind of young. It was right. I don't know how to say when.
You can tell us. We're not going to tell anyone.
But generally, I feel like I have advocated for myself to the best of my ability. And the more I value myself, the more I realize I don't have to fight to advocate for myself. I just need to speak.
It's already there.
Well, because we only fight because we fear we're not being heard.
A lot of like knowing sounds in the audience. I think you're striking a chord. So I'm sure you get asked a lot about advice. And it's not so much, I'd like to know the best advice you've ever received, but something you really wish you would have known before you started, whether it was when you were 17, when you were sort of hitting your strides, something that could have made life a little easier for you that perhaps could help people sitting here today.
So kind of two things come to mind. I don't know if I have the most succinct way of saying this, but I think I was so afraid to fail. I was so afraid to make mistakes that I always encourage, others as in doing so, I'm encouraging myself to know that there is great value in taking the risk to make mistakes. And we get, where I think I was such a perfectionist that I didn't give myself room to grow. Because when you're a perfectionist, you contract. And so I would say that was one, which is celebrate your mistakes. Like it's the failures where we actually grow. I think I remember hearing George Clooney say, I've never learned anything from my successes, just my failures. And there is some truth to that. I think the other thing is I remember saying to this woman who I didn't actually even know very well, we were in discussion, I was saying something about not being good enough. And she said to me very sweetly, you will never be good enough, but you can know the value of your worth. Just put down the measuring stick. And that stuck with me in a deep way.
Very sage advice. I love it. 2 more questions. What's next for you after you recover from this exhausting year? And it sounds like you're just about to go shoot something else, but sort of what's the 2025 plan after this kind of
So I haven't quite
craziness?
gotten that far, but so I go next week to just do 1 week that I think will be really just great play with Boots Riley, a filmmaker who is so also very out of the box, very experimental. Clearly, this might be my experimental phase.
Like if we're talking about eras, since we talk about eras, which era is this for you now? The weird era?
Yeah. I think it's like, allowing my true eccentric side to come out. But I think is something that's, not safe. Like when we play safe, it's not fun, and we don't grow, which is also not fun. And then, I don't know. I've probably already said it. I mean, come on, we know Tato Sheridan. There'll be a second season. So
history has shown.
Yes. History has shown, and he does like to play the long game. And in the first season, I will say I am the Where's Waldo of this season. But that is another one that when I went down to Texas to meet with Taylor, he does not give you the script. There is not a script to give you. He basically pitches you what his idea is, and you either say, I'm going to trust you and you're going to trust me, and it's and yes or not. For kind of a straight, tough guy, he writes pretty spectacular women. So complex and nuanced and flawed and kind of juicy that there was no way I was not going to say yes.
Well, it's kind of bringing you back to your soap opera days a little bit. It's like he writes kind of soaps for men.
But hopefully a little smarter. Not to say anything negative about soaps.
It's different.
You can only reach to a certain height when you're churning out that many pages on a daily basis.
Absolutely. He's sort of the modern day Dallas, I guess, is a better comparison.
Let's not even, I would go,
he has a lot going on, and we're very glad to see you in that universe. And final question, who or what gives you the most sense of peace and happiness in your life right now?
Outside of my children, it would have to be Pilaf, the little mouse.
I was wondering if we were going to
I'm sorry I didn't
Pilaf.
bring her today, but it was a longer conversation, so... But she is usually with me.
And for those who may not know who Pilaf is, can you share who Pilaf
So
is?
Pilaf was a gift from my youngest daughter. She is a long-haired Chihuahua who is 1.5 pounds. She is essentially a guinea pig with slightly longer legs, and truly a magical creature. And I will say, when I went over to do the Substance, I was shooting in a foreign country for 5.5 months with none of my normal support system. I was there by myself. And she had just arrived in my life like the week before. And so I have a deep bond with this little creature. And really how lucky we are that we have our little furry family to she really anchored me from the insanity. And by the way, she recognized me even in all of the prosthetics. I would walk in and she always knew it was me. So,
thank goodness for our furry friends. Well, I can speak for everyone and just saying thank you so much for everything you've done for Hollywood and for women. And
thank you all so much for being here.
Thank you so
truly
much.
appreciate it.
Congratulations. Thank you.